Damage over time. DoT, a playstyle where stacking debuffs would reward patience with explosive payoff. But quickly after its release, DoT teams have gone from dominating to barely scraping by. So what went wrong? Was it power creep, bad game design, or did Hoyoverse just forget about this archetype entirely? Let's rewind to patch 1.2. Before Kafka's release, the only experience players had with DoT was through the nihility path of the simulated universe. Kafka wasn't just a character, she was an entire playstyle. Her ability to detonate all DoT effects instantly turned what should have been a slow burn mechanic into a monster at the time. She was the first, and still is, the enabler of the entire DoT playstyle. Solo DoT was commonplace. Yet the prevalence and accessibility of 4-star characters synergistic with Kafka skyrocketed her value. Sampo, a wind shear, sub DPS released in 1.0. Serval, a DPS that uses shock DoT, given for free in 1.0 to pre-registered users and in 1.4 through an event selector. Luca, a bleed DPS that released alongside Kafka in 1.2. Asta, a harmony support that provided exact buffs to stats that Kafka required. Attack and speed, and a free character in 1.0. Gwynaifen, a burn DPS that also increases damage received, released in 1.4. Kafka shredded through early game content and even 1.x patches endgame content, like Memory of Chaos and Pure Fiction. And with the release of further supports like Huo in 1.5, replacing Natasha or Bailu with her pseudo-harmony buffs of attack and energy that DoT specialized in. Runmei in 1.6, increasing weakness break efficiency, providing an extra turn where enemies remained weakness broken, as well as general damage percent, all buffs DoT could take advantage of, compared to harmonies like Bronya. And also Black Swan, a dedicated sub-DPS to pair with Kafka, with her stacking DoT Arcana, allowing Kafka to proc massive amounts of damage. Black Swan, after months of Kafka's release, provided arguably the biggest buff to DoT teams directly, rather than indirectly through releasing a synergistic support, by finally filling the second slot in Kafka's best-in-slot team. The defense shred on her skill and Epiphany on her ultimate, which allows Arcana to proc without resetting once per enemy, and increasing damage received were incredibly useful. Higher stat counts of Arcana even allowed adjacent enemies to take some level of damage, which Kafka's skill detonation was unable to do. Yet even with Black Swan, DoT teams never had a concrete reason to play over other teams. Immediately after Kafka's release, hypercarry DPS characters like Imbibitor Lunai and Jingliu were churned out. Jingliu especially posed a significant problem to DoT teams due to her sheer power at the time, being able to brute force most MOCs when she wasn't shielded with ice-weak enemies. The release of Acheron in 2.1 further eclipsed 1.x carries. Jingwen was still suffering from his core flaws since 1.0, despite indirect buffs each patch. Dan Heng and Jingliu were simply not dealing enough damage to compare with Acheron. Argenti became a pure fiction-focused specialist. Seal was never to be seen again. With characters like Ratio and Jingliu struggling to keep up, how could Kafka? The release and development of other archetypes like the FUA archetype with Aventurine, Robin, Jade, and Fake Xiao, and the break meta with Boothill, Firefly, Rappa, and Fugue, left DoT with nothing for the remainder of the 2.x patches. The only indirect DoT buff was Jiao Q, working as a side grade to ruin Mei at E0, with his true DoT potential locked behind his E2, merely to free up Ruin Mei for her essential role in break teams. Why wait for DoT ticks when you could just delete the enemy before they took a turn? Not to mention fatal flaws faced by Nihility characters in general exacerbated DoT's performance. HP inflation of bosses that gained drastically higher speed resulted in a greater need to reapply debuffs, bosses losing all debuffs when changing phase, and requiring effect hit rate to guarantee DoT application, while harmonies have guaranteed buff uptime. Yet despite all these flaws, DoT has surprisingly been able to hold its own in MOC, yet it is incredibly difficult to do so without its premium teams. DoT has persisted through different metas with new variations, from Dacheron and Cypher DoT teams to more estranged versions such as Boothill Kafka and Fugue DoT teams. Additionally, Kafka's upcoming 3.4 buffs which allow her to detonate dots in blast rather than single target, improved DoT DMG team-wide among other changes, should revitalize her strength. Furthermore, a new DoT planar set released in 3.4, as well as Heislands, a bleed DPS that may allow dots to crit, should massively buff Kafka with her release in 3.5, and hopefully it is enough to make Kafka worth playing rather than subpar. DoT isn't dead, merely asleep. What do you think? Is DoT salvageable, or should we accept our fate? Drop your hot takes below, and if you're still coping with a DoT team, maybe hit that like button for moral support.